Today I'll be doing my Week 9 college football predictions. So starting with the biggest game of the week, Ohio State at Penn State. So when it comes to coaching in this game, both teams are well coached, but I would give Ohio State the advantage. James Franklin is a very good football coach, but Ryan Day is a better coach. Ryan Day is at 5-0 against James Franklin, and both of these head coaches have had a lot of struggles in the big games. But James Franklin has had even more struggles than Ryan Day has, and it's not just the head coach that I think is better for Ohio State than Penn State. I think Ohio State's coaching staff is better than Penn State's too. James Franklin, you could call him Little Win Franklin because he wins pretty much all of the games against the not very good teams, but then loses all of the games to the great teams. But at quarterback in this game, Drew Aller, Penn State's quarterback, has made some improvement this season. Enough improvement to where I guess I can stop calling him Disaster Aller, at least for now. So he will be a game time decision to play in this game. I saw he got hurt in the Wisconsin game last week, but I do think he's going to play. I saw he's been practicing and is probably going to play. But Will Howard has done a nice job at quarterback for Ohio State since he's been there. He's been an upgrade over Kyle McCord. And then at wide receiver, Ohio State has the advantage here by quite a bit. So in the Ohio State Penn State game, last season. Marvin Harrison was really the difference. He had a huge game, and I know he's gone now, but Ohio State has Abuka healthy now, and he didn't even play in the Penn State game last season. And they've got Jeremiah Smith now, who is already like Marvin Harrison. So Ohio State, I think, is in even better shape now against Penn State than they were against them last year. And for Penn State at wide receiver, they last year did not have that go-to wide receiver that was really good. Uh, and Ohio State's former wide receiver, Julian Fleming, Penn State brought in, hoping that he could be that really good go-to wide receiver for them this season, but it hasn't worked out. He only has 10 catches this season. Now, Penn State does have a big advantage over Ohio State at tight end. Tyler Warren is one of the best tight ends in the country. He set a NCAA record high for most catches in a game by a tight end against USC, where he had 17 catches. And the running backs in this game are great. There are four really good running backs. Each team has two really good ones. Ohio State's a combination of Judkins and Henderson is I still think the best in the country, but Penn State's combination of Singleton and Allen is not far behind. And if the offensive lines for each team can hold up in this game, I think there's going to be a lot of rushing yards. So at the line of scrimmage in this game, Ohio State's offensive line has really been what has held them back in recent years. Now, Ohio State's offensive line has never been bad, but it just hasn't been elite in a long time. And if they had an elite offensive line these past two seasons, they probably would have won the national title. And Ohio State's offensive line did not do well against Nebraska last week, who has a good defensive line, and that is concerning because Penn State does have a even better defensive line than Nebraska does. But Ohio State's running backs did not do very well against Nebraska last week because of the offensive line struggles. Judkins and Henderson combined for only 54 yards in that game. Judkins had only 29 yards on 10 carries, and Henderson had only 25 yards on 10 carries. But it's not all bad news for Ohio State because their offensive line uh, against Iowa, who has a even better defensive line than Nebraska does, held up fine in that game. And when they win against Oregon, who has a even better defensive line than Penn State does, their offensive line held up fine. And even though they lost the game, it wasn't their offensive line's fault. Really, the truth is with that game is it was two really good teams that played really hard, and one team ended up with one more point than the other at the end of regulation. And Penn State's offensive line, though, I think is a concern in this game too, because when they played Ohio State last year, and Ohio State has the same defensive line now that they had in that game last year. Their offensive line that was supposed to be one of the best in the country got pushed around so badly by Ohio State's defensive line that it looked like a FCS offensive line playing against Ohio State. And I know Penn State's offensive line has mostly new players now, but I wouldn't really say that is a good thing because they lost some really good players like Olo Fashionua, who was the best offensive tackle in the country last season. But at the line of scrimmage, I would give Ohio State the advantage by a little bit on both sides. And then the rest of the defense, the linebackers in the secondary, both teams are very good. But Ohio State, I think, is a little bit better. And one of Ohio State's safeties, Lathan Ransom, was injured, but I saw he's expected to play in this game. So that's good news for Ohio State. So I think this is going to be more of a defensive game. I think it's going to be a really close game that will be a four-quarter game and probably go down to the last play. But I just trust Ohio State a little more, and I think they get the win over Penn State. I've got uh, mm, Ohio State 24, Penn State 20. So now Ole Miss against Arkansas, the Woo Pig Suey Dummies. So good news for Ole Miss in this game is they've got a good quarterback. Jackson Dart threw for 311 yards against Oklahoma, who has a pretty good secondary, and uh, Arkansas's secondary has been struggling this season. Now, Arkansas's offense has been improved this year with Bobby Petrino, and their quarterback, Taylon Green, has been a good fit in Petrino's offense. He had last week 314 passing yards and 79 rushing yards. But you do have to remember that even though he had those numbers and Arkansas scored 58 points last week, that was against the other Mississippi team that probably has the worst defense in the country. But Green has done a pretty good job running and passing this season. And Arkansas's linemen on both sides aren't the most talented, but they're really big. Now, not that they don't have talented linemen, they do. Landon Jackson on the defensive line is one of the best in the country, but it's kind of concerning being an Ole Miss fan for Ole Miss's offensive line in this game because their offensive line got pushed around by Kentucky and by LSU, and a lot in the first half against Oklahoma, and with Arkansas's defensive lineman being so big. I'm concerned that that's going to happen in the Arkansas game. I don't think Ole Miss is going to be able to run the football very well in this game. Now, I think Ole Miss's defensive line will hold up fine against Arkansas, but Arkansas's head coach Sam Pittman is very good at coaching offensive lines. That's what he did before he took the head coaching job at Arkansas. But Ole Miss has the advantage at wide receiver. Trey Harris, I saw is questionable to play, but I think he'll probably play. It would have been 3 weeks this Saturday since he last played, and his injury didn't look to be really severe. And Arkansas, though, does have one really good receiver, Andrew Armstrong. He's not as good as Trey Harris, but he's better than all of the other Ole Miss receivers. But Ole Miss has an advantage because Trey Harris has more help at wide receiver than Armstrong does at Arkansas. And Ole Miss, I was glad to see it finally got Caden Prescorn involved with pass catching last week, the tight end. And then Ole Miss's front seven is the best it's ever been. Walter Nolan on the defensive line did get hurt in the first half of the Oklahoma game, and I saw though he's expected to play. And Princely Emmanuel finally was healthy last week, and he had 2 sacks in the Oklahoma game. And JJ McGee's had a big game against Oklahoma. He had 6 tackles and 2 sacks. And at linebacker, Centarian Perkins for Ole Miss has become a star for them. The five-star sophomore. He had against Oklahoma a huge game. He had 11 tackles and 4 sacks. I've never heard of a player getting 4 sacks in a game. And then TJ Daugherty at linebacker has become a really good player for Ole Miss as a freshman. And then Chris Paul from Arkansas has been really good for Ole Miss at linebacker this season. So if Ole Miss is going to beat Arkansas, I think they're going to have to do it through the air, and I think they will have a lot of success passing on Arkansas in this game. And Bobby Petrino, even though he's improved their offense this year against good defenses, they haven't been very good this year. When they played Texas A&M, they scored 17 points. A&M's got a good defense, and when they played Tennessee, who's got a good defense, they scored only 19 points. And then when they played against LSU, who's got a decent defense, they only scored 10 points. So I think Ole Miss will be able to do pretty well with stopping the Arkansas offense. I think this is going to be a close game, but I think Ole Miss gets the win. I've got Ole Miss 28, Arkansas 21. And now Georgia versus Florida. So a bigger advantage, I think, than players for Georgia in this game is coaching. Kirby Smart is so much better of a coach than Billy Napier is. That I think if Kirby Smart had Florida's roster and Billy Napier had Georgia's roster, Kirby Smart would still beat him. Napier is a terrible coach that I still think is going to get fired. And Georgia's offense hasn't been as good this year as I thought it was going to be. So they may not run the score up in the 40s in this game, but I still think Georgia's going to score quite a bit. Florida's defense is not very good, and Georgia's defense is going to, I think, be a big problem for Florida in this game. If Texas's offensive line couldn't handle Georgia, I don't think that Florida's offensive line is going to be able to. Georgia's defensive line, with Michael Williams now being healthy, seems to be a lot improved. He had a big game against Texas, 3 tackles and 2 sacks and a forced fumble. And Georgia didn't even have a linebacker Smile Munden in that Texas game, who's maybe even better player than Michael Williams is. I saw he's questionable to play in this game, but this is going to be a blowout win for Georgia. And Florida even lost their quarterback for the season, Graham Mertz. They're starting a five-star quarterback, but he's a true freshman, and that's not going to go well against Georgia. So I've got Georgia getting the win 34 to 13 over Florida. And now Oregon at Michigan. So when you compare quarterbacks between these two teams, they're about as far apart from each other as you could be. Oregon's got the best quarterback in the country, Dylan Gabriel, who I don't know if he'll win the Heisman or not, but he should win the Heisman, I think, if he keeps playing the way he has been. And then Michigan has a couple of quarterbacks that can barely throw a pass. So Michigan started with Davis Warren at quarterback this season. He was their starter for a couple of games, and then they benched him for Alex Orji, who was better for them with the run game, but was an even worse passer than Warren was. So then they went to a third quarterback, and then he retired. So now they're back to the quarterback they began with, Warren. And Michigan's defense does still have a lot of good players, but their coaching is just so bad this season. Oregon's got a huge coaching advantage over them. And Oregon this year is better at the line of scrimmage than Michigan is. Michigan's offense has no hope of being able to keep up with Oregon in this game, and Oregon's defense is better this year than Michigan's is too. Michigan's defense has not been great this year, so this is going to be a blowout. I've got Oregon getting the win, 38-7 over Michigan. So that will be it with this video. Please subscribe. Thanks for watching, and I'll be back soon.